All right, I'm sharing my screen. Get started. All right. So for those of you who couldn't make it last week, I want to quickly go over the changes that we brought about. Since this is the last week before we end for this year, I wanted to make sure we leave the project on a positive note, and to that end, we started moving towards a goal that is easily achievable, which is changing the way we do the project management. Until this point, we were tracking the project as things came along until the KEP was merged. The KEP was merged early last month or so. And after that, we've been looking into using more standard practices for managing the project. So we've moved to using GitHub projects. Under the Kubernetes SIG organization, there's a project named Container Object Storage, where we're tracking all the issues, milestones, and tasks that are being worked on. This is meant to help others easily onboard to our project and quickly start contributing. We did this last Tuesday, and after that, we've actually got 2 new contributors, contributors that we haven't spoken to. I haven't seen in the meetings either, but they were able to start helping out. So one of them is Somers B. Matthews. Another one I mentioned last week. Manjunath K. So this form of project management is definitely working. And I want to quickly go over where we are at in terms of what we planned for this week. So between at the beginning of last week and now, for each of the repositories, you can see the number of pull requests made and pull requests merged. I'm using pull requests as the metric here because generally in open source, the biggest bottleneck is going to be the review process, even more than writing code and adding tests, and also the response to the review process is going to be slow. So having pull requests as a metric, especially the number of pull requests merged, is a good way to tell how the progress is happening. So this is what the statistics look like. In comparison to last week, we've had about 3 new pull requests in controller, one in controller, one in sidecar, and one in API. And documentation pull requests in each of them. So go to the next thing. So before the end of this week, that is before the end of the year, here are the goals we laid out. We want to have very basic documentation, something that people can just update at readme.md, which the community has contributed to us, and we've got it now. They just have to be merged by our CI. Here, Shing, I had a question for you. So I was reviewing this pull request in the spec repo. Where is spec? Yeah, here. And the change looks good. I know we talked about having privileges given, in a specific way for the spec repo. However, it's good that I have merge requests. I just wanted to be upfront about it, understand if this is oversight or if this is intended. Hello? So Shing, can you hear me?
We can still hear you.
Yeah, so I'll follow up outside of this meeting. Okay, so the other thing we had in mind was setting up container repositories. So I'm going to pause here for a second and ask Srini. Srini, are you on the call?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. There is some problem with my machine. So, yeah, for the image repositories, we discussed last week that once we cut a release, it should automatically persist. Until then, we are going to use the key.io, as Ben said. So key.io is set up so we can start pushing images there for integration testing.
Where is that documented?
I can add that to one of the readmes, I guess. I think we can, like the current PR that is merged, we should have the general information, the spec repo. I can update it.
Okay.
So I can post that where it is for now. I think I posted it last time. So
okay.
Give me a second. I'll post that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be good, Srini. So at this point, before we get into naming, I want to quickly get an update from everyone who's been working on the different components. Is Rob on the call? Rob, are you here? I guess not. Okay. Tejas, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here, Sid.
Hey, do you want to give a quick update on the changes you made last week?
Yeah, so we got we migrated the customized template, got those merged. There's an issue open on the changes that we need to do for that, and Nicholas has added more details. So looking at that, and I'll update customize based on that.
Okay, so there are so based on Nicholas's comments, we need to make some changes to customize that.
Yeah. We need to kind of do it the right way, have the overlays, and have customized work in different environments. So yeah, it's like the next step.
Okay, I believe Nicholas on the call.
Yep.
Hey, Nicholas. So hey, so you said you'd have some time to help out this week, right?
Yep.
Yeah, please coordinate with Tejas. I can introduce the two of you on Slack. To finish this customized part. That'll be very
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so Jeff, are you on the call?
Yes.
Hey Jeff, I believe you worked on a few things last week too, especially with the KEP. Is that right?
No, I've just been reviewing. I did review a KEP PR. I think we need to create another KEP PR as we're learning. It might be a bit ambiguous how Cozy works in certain situations. We learn this as the team's writing code, and I think we need to make sure it's defined in the KEP as well.
Can you
I
elaborate?
haven't done that PR yet. I've just been reviewing PRs.
Okay, so you'll be working on that PR, or is someone else looking into it?
Well, I think, yeah, I want to touch base with Rob. But yeah, I'm happy to create the PR for the KEP. I just want to get some more information first.
Got it. Got it. What was the ambiguity?
You know, that's what I'm trying to remember now. I have to go back to last week and look at our Slack
Is it
notes.
something to do
There's
with all the
something
protocol?
we both, several people sort of did a thumb on the dialogue that, yeah, this was something that should be done, but I've got to go back and refresh my memory now.
Yeah, no worries. Is Krish on the call?
Yep.
Hey Krish, did you want to give us an update on the Csa Adapter?
Yeah, sure. So my PR with some of the initial boilerplate for the Csa Adapter was opened and merged in last week. And so now I'm just working on Some further PRs to get the rest of the code moved over from the container object storage interface org to the Kubernetes SIG repo.
Understood. So you're working on moving the code to the official repos.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And Sajan, are you here?
Yes. Yeah. Hi, Sid.
Hey, do you have an update to give us?
No, actually, I'm working on migrating the code from to KTS. So
Okay.
I don't have any of.
I
It
saw
will
that you
do.
made a
That's
pull
why.
request. I left one tiny comment on it. Did you get?
Yeah, I saw that. I couldn't make another push. I'll do that.
Sounds good.
I'll try. Yeah.
Sounds good. So to everyone in the community, all of these, this activity is open and available for everyone to see in the individual repositories. You can go to github.com, Kubernetes 6, go under projects and look here, and you should be able to see the different things that we're working on. Everyone's review is welcome. And similarly, everyone's contribution is also welcome here. Please, if you get a chance, please look at some of the PRs and leave your reviews there. It'll help you to follow the project, and also, we'll improve the project, and at the same time, it'll set you up to contribute in the future if you haven't already done so. All right. So there's two things left that I want to talk about. One is I want to revisit the naming changes that we talked about last week. And two is we have someone from Pure Storage here. I believe Adam, is that right?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, Adam. Adam reached out to us on our Slack channel. Adam, do you want to give us, before I go into naming, I think it's good to have you introduce yourself and also talk about the questions you had.
Sure. So yeah, my name's Adam. I'm from Pure Storage. Basically, someone reached out to me and wanted me to give a summary presentation of what Cozy is to one of our V teams. So I just threw a presentation together and wanted to just do maybe a quick fact check to see if I missed anything obvious. If people have time. If there's no time, that is no worry at all.
Mm-hmm. So he had one specific question, and it also raised a more important issue, which is documentation. So give me 1 second. Okay, so when Nicholas raised an issue about 3 weeks ago, how to get onboarded, we understood that we needed to improve project management. And now when Adam came up and asked how Cozy works, we realized that we should improve documentation. And we've already started work on that, and we're definitely on the right path. So as a part of today's meeting, I want to quickly go over how credentials are passed into workloads, which is the specific question that Adam had. Am I right, Adam?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so we'll quickly go over it, and it'll also be a refresher for others. And if I've missed anything, feel free to correct me. Okay, so I've called it credential minting. Basically, what I'm talking about here is once a bucket is provisioned and access for that bucket is provisioned, that is, say, access keys and secret keys are created for the bucket in the backend. What I'm going to talk about is how information about the bucket and the access is provided to a workload. Initially, our idea was to use environment variables to pass in credential data. Then slowly we started realizing that there are a few other use cases where environment variables would not work. One of them is when we have multiple buckets being used by a single workload. When you have multiple buckets used by a single workload, a single environment variable would not do. And you could say that you will have multiple environment variables, However, it becomes cumbersome once we look into what kind of information needs to be passed in. So for a workload to access a bucket, the workload needs information about the name of the bucket, the endpoint for the bucket, the HTTP or HTTPS endpoint, credentials, and any other information that's pertinent to talking to the backend. So in case of S3, we need to know the region, we need to know the signature version, and so on and so forth for the other providers. So in the end, we came up with a list of things that are needed, and the list of information is actually summarized here. So we need under the in the left hand side list, I've called it bucket directory, and for each bucket, last we decided was to have a separate bucket directory by the name of the bucket itself. And the location for that bucket directory would be provided by the user. So in the pod spec, the user would create a volume of our type. We'll have to come up with a name for that, but let's just call it object storage interface. And that volume would have to be mounted at a particular location, which is what we would use as the bucket directory. Under the bucket directory, we'll have credentials, that is the credentials needed to access the bucket, a file called bucket.json. I'll go into what it includes, and then a bunch of certs. The specific certs are client cert, CA cert, and client key. So Adam, does this answer your question, at least at the top level, at the simplest level?
Somewhat, yes. So I guess where I'm coming from, so I'll admit I'm not a common user of like buckets and object storage, but from what I've seen of apps that do use it, they usually have them passed in either as environment variables or as part of a config YAML. And I guess my concern or question is how would we translate from this like bucket directory into that config to actually use it easier? So I guess I'm trying to figure out that part.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, is the assumption that apps will have to start learning how to read like a bucket.json file?
Yes, that is the expectation.
If that's the expectation, that's an acceptable answer. I just wanted to know what the plan was. So works for me. Okay.
Okay. So here's what happens if there are multiple buckets for the same workload. Each bucket would get its own bucket directory, and you'd have the same files put into each of the bucket directories. I mean, you'd have the same kinds of files put into each of the bucket directory for the respective buckets. Okay, we'll go into what bucket.json includes. So the bucket.json is meant to serve as an API between the work that we're doing and the workload. So the way we've defined it right now is the same field. So the bucket class and the bucket resource has a protocol field, and the contents of the protocol field is what will be put into the bucket.json as well. The reason we decided to go with this is because the protocol field as a part of the bucket class and bucket is by default versioned, and it goes through the versioning process of Kubernetes. And also because this is an immutable part of the bucket, we have some guarantees on how this would work. And we don't have to deal with updates during the life cycle of the bucket itself. Now, each protocol will have its own set of fields. So I've taken an example of S3 here. We have a signature version, endpoint, region, bucket name for S3. So that's what the bucket, well, I've shown a YAML file here, but the equivalent JSON is what we would use. Call it bucket.yaml.
All makes sense so far. Okay.
Yeah, that's about it for the credential provisioning. Did anyone have any questions so far?
Yes.
Yes, please.
We've been going over this quite a bit, so maybe I lost track at some point. Weren't we also going to expose things using the SDK standard files?
Yeah, so the credentials file is a part of
Okay.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay, that
Yeah.
actually explains a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a good question, Nicholas. Okay, so let's go over naming again. All right. So the current name is Container Object Storage Interface. I brought up last week that the work that we're doing, unlike CSI or Container Storage Interface or CNI, Container Network Interface, we do not integrate with a container. We integrate at two levels. One is with the application using the bucket.json and the associated files, and other with Kubernetes itself, where we integrate using the gRPC API. What we're doing is has little to do with containers actually, and it's more of just an object storage interface. And additionally, the name Container Object Storage Interface, ends up, the acronym of it ends up being COSI or COSI. COSI sounds not too serious, I would say, even though the work we're undertaking is, important and, it's a serious undertaking. So I've been thinking about proposing, or we need to actually work with a name that is more accurate, firstly. And my inclination right now is to go towards object storage interface. I know what we spoke of as we left off last week, we were leaning towards this. And I believe there are also some points against this. So I would like to hear them out, hear thoughts on what do you think about this name, and see if we can make a decision today or by the end of the week. What do you all think about the name Object Storage Interface instead of COSI, Container Object Storage Interface?
Is this for the RPC interface or for the everything?
Everything.
I feel like you kind of want two names.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Okay, so one for the RPC interface. Okay, so which could be Object Storage Interface.
I mean, for the top part, well, I guess I don't remember if you were actually at the meeting where this part of it was covered, Sid, but we were saying that like the Kubernetes part of it, it would be ideal if it wasn't viewed as separate from Kubernetes, but just this is the Kubernetes object storage interface,
I agree.
And to brand it as such, so that it's viewed as, this is just the way it is done in Kubernetes. And we would want buy-in from the rest of SIG storage, but I can't imagine any resistance in that area. But then once you get down to the RPC interface, there is this belief that it will be useful outside of Kubernetes. Therefore, you don't want to brand it Kubernetes. I don't know. My objections to just calling it OSI.
Well, the main objection is there's already an OSI, right?
Yeah, well, there's multiple OSIs that come up when you search for Kubernetes OSI or container OSI. They're extremely relevant acronyms that will conflict. So having a slightly longer name to deconflict the acronym.
What do we see if we search for Kubernetes OSI?
The open source initiative, I think, is the big one.
Okay.
You get the networking OSI, right?
Yeah, there's that one too.
Yeah. I think OSI is being redefined. I mean, it's getting kind of overused almost. Is that what you're saying? Because this is a whole new definition of OSI right here, the first article. And we know the standard OSI, which is from operating system standpoint. And I guess open source initiative. I haven't seen that open source OSI, open source initiatives.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think these guys do Kubernetes related work, and so they might not appreciate having their acronyms stolen. But I don't know. I mean, acronyms are acronyms, right?
Yeah, I know. And good acronyms are, there are different usages for it, and none of
but
it is going to end up, overlapping with someone else. We just have to make sure it's different enough that it makes sense to reuse it.
I think what matters in a practical term is that, like, when somebody Googles it, they can find it. Like that's one of the problems with Go as a programming language. They had to start calling it Golang so that you could Google it and find something.
Right. No, in addition, also, it should be easy to say and express. CSI got that right. With especially with consumers of CSI, that is when I speak with customers of MinIO, managers and directors and vice presidents of different enterprises, they ask, do you have a CSI driver? I almost never hear if you have an OCI compliant runtime. Actually, so the naming matters. I think OSI is a good pick. I'm open to new ideas, different ideas too. I think Kubernetes OSI is good too. I really do like that.
I still like COSI because it's, first of all, it's what we've been using up until now, and it has OSI in it, but it's just one letter longer, which makes it that much easier to disambiguate in a search.
The problem is we're really not, it's inaccurate. And also,
I know it is, and I admit that. I'm just saying that it's close enough, and it has all the other benefits that a four-letter acronym is better than three, and you can't use Kubernetes down at this layer because the RPC layer is not intended to be tied to Kubernetes.
I agree, but it's not intended to be tied to containers either.
Yeah,
but the same applies to CSI.
Mm-hmm. So, no, CSI is purely at the container level. What we provision is file storage or block storage, both of which are at the container. Are supported by the OCI itself.
Well, but sure, but I mean, you could call into a CSI plugin and use the mount point that this thing sets up for you for completely different purposes.
That's true. I mean, that would be very weird, but it's technically possible.
There's really not much of a difference between CSI being container specific or Cozy being container specific. Neither of them are.
No, CSI is definitely container specific. The unit of abstraction with provisioning file and block storage is the container. You can provision it purely for a container. There's no Kubernetes needed.
So that's not actually true. I think if you read the Kubernetes or the CSI spec, they do refer to the thing called the CO, the so-called container orchestrator. But then when they talk about publishing volumes and staging volumes and consuming volumes, they're always talking about like a workload consuming a volume, and they're talking about a mount point or a device. They're not talking about pods or containers or namespaces. It's at the, when you read the RPC docs, it's really talking about, you're taking a volume, you're making it available at a mount point, and you presume that a container orchestrator is going to consume that to do something, but it's not made explicit.
Right. But the definition of a container orchestrator is very minimal in that case. All they expect you to do is have a mechanism to call the appropriate gRPC API. Is all is required of the container orchestrator.
Right. But like one could develop something entirely not container related and say, you know what, I'm going to consume the CSI API for my storage interface, and you could make it work. And the same is true of,
No, but it's
this
about how we
cozy or
define the
OSI
standard, right?
thing. So,
No,
I mean,
I agree.
I'm admitting that we're not tied to containers, but it doesn't seem crazy to just use the word container for continuity with CSI and everything else.
It almost seems like it's an easy pick. I'll tell you that. Cozy is an easy pick. It also rhymes with easy. I don't like that.
Is the main issue
Go ahead.
fusion? I know Ben has said our target customer is the developer, is the app developer, not the vendor.
No, not at all. Actually, the target customer is not the app developer. One of the stakeholders is the app
And
developer.
there's a
The
disagreement.
target customer is any organization that wants to leverage object storage.
Yeah, for the RPC half of what we're doing, I would say the target is both ourselves and the storage and the storage driver creators or the storage companies at this layer. Up at the other layer, the downward facing API and the sideways facing API, or I don't know what you call those. I guess the upward facing API. The app developer is definitely the primary concern for the Kubernetes pieces of this. But when we talk about the RPC, I think it's fair to say, no, it really is the storage vendors that are going to be consuming that.
I think in both cases, an interface for object storage is what we're providing.
So is there another, I guess, proposal on the table other than Cozy or OSI?
Kubernetes object storage interface. I'm still for just object storage interface. We don't even have to abbreviate. We don't even have to call it OSI. We just call it object storage interface. Because that's really what it is. For someone writing an application, they're using the interface to object storage, regardless of what the underneath object storage provider is. And for the gRPC implementer, the vendor, it's the same thing.
Are you just saying container superfluous because all the workloads are containerized?
And incorrect.
It's just extra verbiage?
No, it's actually incorrect.
You know, there's container native foundations, container storage, container.
No, it's cloud native foundation.
Containerization is a popular activity these days.
I don't know if you can hear me, Jeff.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. I agree, Jeff. Containerization, well, it's come and gone now, but yeah, it is. The container wars, I would say, are over. Right now, it's Kubernetes adoption that's going on. Back in 2015, Rocket had just come out, and there was no OCI at that point, and Docker was reigning big. Back then, I would say containerization was big. Right now, though, it's people are moving to Kubernetes, and I think Kubernetes object storage interface makes sense. If not just object storage interface.
But remember that the idea is that this is the name for the bottom half of the thing that really isn't tied to Kubernetes, and in principle, that non-Kubernetes things might consume.
Yeah, that keeps bringing back here.
Sid, can I add
please.
one thought? I think I hear what you're trying to do is break the pattern, right? Mostly, but to make it more unique in that sense. And I think that's kind of the question is there more appreciation around the people we're targeting with, more of the same pattern for this, and keeping the pattern and, making it easy to find or expect what to find, right? Both in naming and terminology, or kind of looking at it for a more I think what you're trying to do is suggest something that sounds a little bit more generic, sounds a little bit more holistic, And to me, I favor the first, I think, just because it's not that we're not trying to create something very unique, but I'm not sure if just breaking the name pattern really makes such a big difference around it, right? I think.
Yeah.
And I know for me personally, seeing, like, I've been reading through docs of various things, see something has helped me recognize that it's probably an interface of some sort in like the Kubernetes landscape. So I think fitting that naming pattern does help recognizability.
Plus, what some things I saw or heard from the field is that customers are looking for containerized object storage for containers, all that kind of stuff. So even though technically we may not be tied to containers, from a marketing point of view, you'll have it'll be easier to sell when you say this thing is an interface for object storage in container environments, because people are looking for it. Whether there is technical merit in it or not is a different question, but marketing wise, it works.
So what people are looking for in the field is some way to utilize object storage natively in Kubernetes, not in containers. And they specifically asked this question, as I'm sure we're all in the same field. What they asked for is, first questions they asked for is, does your object storage work with CSI? So people are misguided and they believe the way object storage interacts with Kubernetes is through CSI. Now, if we said no, you have to use something called COSI, I think that is very forgettable at that point and also confusing for them.
I think that issue can be overcome with education. I mean, this thing is new. I think
it's like the case with OCI and even CNI. Very few people talk about these things, and it actually kills the initiative to some extent.
Well,
because most customers, Kubernetes environment comes with a CNI system integrated. It's not something they see. It's not something they need to integrate with the rest of their environment. What if they have a Kubernetes cluster, which comes with a CNI plugin, and they have an external storage system, they do need to integrate.
They still need to choose, and most people just say, "Is that a Calico?" That's kind of how it goes. And the rest of the networking vendors, unless they're bundled in, are lost. I think for all of us, every one of the vendors here, having an easy to relate, easy to say kind of abbreviation will really help. Rather than especially not cozy, because
how does changing it from cozy to OSI help with this particular concern? If people are asking, like, does it do CSI, and we're like, you're asking the wrong question. How does just reducing the acronym length by one improve that situation? I'm not following that step.
Yeah, so no, that's a good question. So we're not just simply reducing the acronym length by one. We're saying the way to integrate with object storage is a completely different way. And saying COSI or instead of CSI or cozy, we'll have to explain that as COSI. It's not different enough. It literally feels
So the concern is it sounds like CSI, and you're worried that then they'll start asking questions about CSI that aren't relevant.
No, not just that. Object storage itself becomes less relevant at that point.
I think cozy really sounds cool. KOSI.
Yeah, KOSI is definitely an option. For people who write anyway. So this is a discussion. We don't.
Can I also ask you maybe just to clarify? So you feel like making it more generic reduces the overall vagueness of it? Because to
I
me,
think
that doesn't.
we're
Like
not.
by saying object storage interface, we're not. What I'm trying to say is maybe it becomes as vague as possible.
I wouldn't
To be
say.
honest.
Yeah, I can see
Well,
where you're coming from
that,
because
that's actually one of my concerns with just calling it OSI is it presumes that this is the only object storage interface that will ever exist, and that we're sort of staking our flag on, you know, object storage for all time by not qualifying it in any way, saying object storage interface period is a very bold claim to make. And I don't
I
know
mean,
if we want.
doesn't that also apply to
But
C?
maybe we don't need to make it now, right? If promoting something to be more generic is, it's not difficult by when it happens,
Mhm.
you know.
No, and another thing is I think having a 3-letter acronym is also important. I think, see, naming is very important because when we get it right, uh, you don't really notice much, but when you get it wrong, you know, it's even hard to pinpoint why something is going wrong. Like, um, there are some terrible names, and simply because of that, things don't get adopted.
I think object storage was a problem for a while because of that, and S3 changed that.
Right, S3 changed that. We can't call ourselves S3I though.
No, but I mean, object storage is a the combination of it doesn't work well in abbreviations, and
Traditional.
so yeah, what can you do? OS something. It's always something about it.
Right.
So
I mean, I think people are getting more educated about object storage. It's more prevalent now. It's being used in more places. Um, I'm open to new suggestions. I still want to really explore a better name for what we're doing, and we should if we are changing the name, we should do it now rather than later, where the changes will be more complex and will require more effort.
I think from maybe from code perspective, it still makes sense to be named Cozy. I mean, if you just name things, but I to me it maybe sounds like it's unless we have a better name to it, like saying we're not dealing with object storage now, we're dealing with buckets, and suddenly buckets is a term that everybody can recognize exactly what it means and why we are saying that we are exposing buckets rather than
I think
specific objects to containers.
I think buckets is not a good name. It's like if you call Google search.com, wouldn't be as famous.
Well, yeah, it's not really looking at the same. So I think we're really trying to generalize. Like Google is is the most specific naming kind of thing, and right here we're trying to say it's an interface to something. It's
Right.
something. We are generalizing something. So it's not about picking the
I think a good acronym is needed. Cozy. I think it's a good name for sure. So it's a great working name. We chose it just for the convenience when we started, and even the repository names right now are completely expanded versions of the word of Cozy. Container dash objects dash storage dash interface. Um, CSI repositories are named CSI dash something. I think
Well, the sidecar repos are. The actual repo is container dash storage dash interface spelled out for the main RPC thing.
yeah, the main RPC thing makes sense. Yeah, I think our RPC thing we should call it whatever we decide it to be, either Cozy or OSI or Kubernetes OSI. What do you all think about Kubernetes OSI?
KOSI?
Yeah.
I'm opposed to that based on the idea it's really not meant to be Kubernetes specific.
It is though, right? I mean, in practice and really, we are integrating it only with Kubernetes.
Well, but that's the thing. People in this group are only integrating with Kubernetes on the user-facing API. Yes, and there we don't have. I mean, we don't really talk about the Kubernetes persistent volume API. It exists kind of, but Kubernetes APIs are just the Kubernetes API as a whole.
Mhm.
While CSI, Cozy, etc., they are not Kubernetes specific, and really I see use cases for
Well,
the
actually-
gRPC API to be used in other environments as well, even though this group may not develop those.
So CSI is not a good analogy here, I think. CSI came about at a time when we had different container runtimes, and we wanted to integrate it with the different container runtimes.
It's
And
still
we
the case
only-
today.
Right now, the integration point is OCI. We don't have to deal with different container runtimes. As long as they're OCI compliant, we work with them. So really, I think I keep coming back to this because it seems to make the most sense. When someone's writing an application that's going to utilize object storage in a generic fashion, what they're utilizing is an interface to object storage, or OSI. If you're pigeonholing it into Kubernetes and being opinionated by calling it Kubernetes-OSI, I don't think we're making it too generic by calling it just OSI.
The people writing an application are interacting with the Kubernetes API. They're not interacting with the gRPC API.
No, they're interacting with the OSI API that we're defining. As far as they're concerned, any application that wants to use this does not need to know Kubernetes at all. Right? Does that make sense? I'm just trying to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying, because an application need not know Kubernetes in order to consume the buckets that we're provisioning for it, right?
Well, yes and no, because
Okay.
it will still be deployed in Kubernetes, even though the application may be totally oblivious of the fact it's provisioned using Kubernetes.
Okay.
But as part of the manifest, you will say, I want a pod that has a CSI, a Cozy CSI volume to expose stuff about the bucket. I have a bucket access request. I have this, I have that. So from a deployment point of view, you do care about the fact it's running in Kubernetes, and the bucket access request API and the bucket API and whatnot are Kubernetes APIs.
Hmm. Okay, makes sense. How about the integration point of view? What's the point of integration?
Which point? Sorry.
Yeah, the integration for the application. Anyone and a developer that's writing an application, they're not dealing with containers in any way. They don't. A lot of developers don't understand containers very well, and
But I think the process of them containerizing, so when they come to containerize their application, it's then that they need to inspect this interface, and
let me give you an example. So let's say there's a front-end developer writing JavaScript, and they want to utilize object storage to pull down their JavaScript, resources, say images or videos or whatever. And that developer doesn't have to know anything about containers or Kubernetes. They're simply just integrating with object storage. And generally in a team structure, the person containerizing the front-end application is going to be a DevOps person. And the application writer is simply just integrating with object storage. So doesn't it make more sense to call it just object storage interface? I see the concern by where we say we're putting a stake on the ground, claiming to be the object storage interface for the world. But
Yeah,
the
right. I think when do you actually get to use this? Is it when you write your own, web application locally and you run it locally? It runs locally. You don't need to configure it. You configure it locally. You don't configure it through object storage interface. You just set the configuration within local environment variables or local end files or whatever, right? That's how you set up locally. But then when you get to containerize and you get to publish your work and send it to some cluster, I think that's the process when you come to say, okay, so what is the interface that I should interact with, right?
Wait,
And I
so
think
wouldn't the changes be in the code though? It's not just while going to production. The code has to
it's not really code, right? That's my kind of.
Really? I mean,
yeah, it's not code. It's like the peripherals of the code. It's a one minor config file in your code. That's what it is.
You're saying, so where I'm coming from is the way you pull the data for the buckets has to be in the code. It's not like a different flag or a different environment variable name or another version of the same of an existing way to pass in data, pass in parameters.
It's very low. I mean, it's very confined. It can be patched very easily when you get to maybe take your make it a product. Or I'm just claiming about this process. I think it still comes down to when
I don't
you.
think it's insignificant, to be honest. I get where you're coming from. However, do you really think? Again, it's a question for everyone. Even like when you have to change your application to interact with object storage in the way that we're defining, where they read bucket.json, they read bucket information from their credential information from whatever file we define, and same with the certs. Is that not a significant enough change for a developer? So that they would do it like while developing the code rather than just before going to production?
Are we going to support developer environments, for example? Like, will I be able to configure object storage interface on my Mac, like for say, and have these different bucket directories on my Mac, and things like that? We didn't even look at this, right?
That's a good question. I mean, it's
that's like,
possible.
yeah, that's a really good question. I would expect someone developing a Kubernetes app would have a Kubernetes cluster to play with for their development purposes, and hopefully.
Actually, so most people writing, say, again, front end is a great example here. Gets deployed on Kubernetes, is basically stateless. However, the people who write it have nothing to do with Kubernetes. They probably just heard of it once.
Right, but like there's a way in which the relevant bucket details get passed into the application, and as long as the Kubernetes, when the application gets thrown into Kubernetes, it gets married to that mechanism. It's no big deal. I mean, like with CSI, you have a bunch of data, you put it in a directory. So when you put your application into Kubernetes, you make sure you set up your pod with a volume that mounts something into that directory that has storage.
Yeah.
Similar here, like you're going to have, I don't know, some shell script or some wrapper script in the container that grabs all the relevant stuff from the bucket downward API and then shoves it into your app in the appropriate way.
Exactly.
And that's just a little shim layer that you would include when you containerize your app if you're developing outside of Kubernetes. I really want to push on this whole idea of that part of the API. Like I said, that doesn't need a name other than just the Kubernetes object, API or whatever we want to call that. But it's important to realize that like once that becomes standardized as like the way Kubernetes does objects, you don't have to implement that using this RPC interface or these sidecars or these drivers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One could vend that interface through an entirely different mechanism if you wanted to do the heavy lifting. Like that's why I see them as separable things. Like we're defining an object interface that faces outward to the developer and to the user. And we plan on developing an implementation of that layers on top of this RPC that we're trying to name right now. But you can break the two apart and say, no, I'm going to use this RPC interface for something that's not Kubernetes, or I can use something else to supply the Kubernetes object interface. And so there's two different things, and we're building both of them and the glue that glues them together.
And I think the application facing API and the provisioning API, the gRPC side and the bucket.json side are actually closely tied together.
We are tying them together, but nothing stops somebody else from pulling them apart and using them independently.
I mean that the format of the credentials file is defined, is expected to be a certain way from the gRPC API. They are they're not tied to Kubernetes, but they're tied to each other.
The credential file being the one that is SDK specific.
Yeah, we expect that.
Right. So that one is consumed by an application that uses that SDK and everything works. Now, the bucket.json you mentioned, and I'm with Ben on this one. With my architect hat on, if someone comes to me and tells me, oh, I will redesign my app so that it can natively read this bucket.json, even though it was doing it differently before, then I don't see why someone would do it that way. You would indeed use either an entry point in the container or an init container or whatnot to parse this bucket.json, spit out a configuration file or potentially environment variables that are just the ones the application expects today, not knowing anything about Cozy, about Kubernetes, about whatnot. You transform them into something that application can use, and the application takes it from there. It should not ever know about the existence of bucket.json.
I don't think it's that simple at all. If it was that simple, then we could have just used environment variables. I think we're painting a too simplistic a scenario. First of all, having this step as a part of the deployment is going to make production more flaky. That's going to be the main concern for using something like a shell script for going to production, where development process doesn't work the same way. The second thing is we have more information than can be put into a few flags or a few environment variables. That's why we're doing it this way. We've talked about this when we were designing bucket.json, and I believe Ben was even advocating for this, that we expect applications to be able to understand bucket.json. I don't think, I know it's not going to be as simple as just using an init container and spitting out a few flags or whatever. If it was
Sid, I'm afraid we have to do a time check.
It's already 1 hour. Yeah, I think that's why I wanted to keep this for the end. We'll keep talking about this, and we'll figure out one way or the other. I'm still leaning towards just object storage interface. I think that's what is going to be the clearest for consumers, both developers and enterprises. So I'm open to new ideas. Again, I'm not stuck on this, but we'll see. That's it from me. If anyone has any questions, please ask. We have maybe a minute or two to answer them. Otherwise, we can reconvene on Thursday. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.